my first drinks before I had my first drink, and that was things like on Mother's Day when I was 7 or 8 years old, I stole some jewelry, a #1 mom pendant from a jewelry store, and the military police on Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, New York, they chased me around the base, but they never caught me and they never got it. And I did stuff like that just for a lot of years before I took my first drink. A lot of just adrenaline, just kind of, can I get away with it? I want what I want it now, and I'm going to take it if you're not going to give it to me. That was just my general attitude. When I was about 10 or 11, maybe 12 or 13 years old, my parents used to have a lot of parties growing up, and they would have 20 to 30 of my father's military work buddies would be over, and they would always get a keg. It happened at least monthly, and drinking was just it was very social. It was very common. It was a lot of it. And then when I finally took my first drink, it was after one of those parties when I think it was 10 or 11, but I got a hold of some Sun Country wine cooler back when it was in the 2-liter, and I didn't have a glass of it. I had the 2-liter bottle, and I don't remember much of that night, but I remember my mother telling me the next day, she's like, well, I guess from now on we're going to have to watch what we leave out around you. And I guess that very first time I made a complete ass of myself, and everybody knew that I was a kid that got drunk. So after that, it didn't, after that I got into some of the other, our sister recovery program. I smoked a lot, and I smoked a lot through most of my teen years, and I really didn't get to drinking until I got out of high school and I moved out of my parents' house is when I really started drinking heavily. And I say heavily, but it was, in the circles that I was in, it was just what we did, what we all, know that we did. It was started on Friday and Saturday nights, and it would, by Sunday afternoon, you're just laying around recovering, watching football. And, and it just did it, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and more, and then some more. And then you'd find, I started finding the places that had the Thirsty Thursday night, or they had the 2 for Tuesday, and it just increased in my later teen years. The phase of my life of my disease before I had my first drink was in high school, when I went to I took a trip in a car. We drove out to the coast, and I had a boat, and I needed a motor for it, so I stole a boat motor, and I ended up getting arrested. It was my junior year of high school. I was charged with 4 felonies. I spent about a week in jail out there, 6 hours away from home. My father came out there, and when I went to court, and I remember that being like the most disgraceful time in my life, and I think that's kind of what transitioned from the adrenaline seeking phase of my disease until, after that is when I started drinking more regularly. Like I would quell my desires with a drink instead of going to get this thing that I needed, whatever it was that week that I needed or wanted. And once I started drinking, then my disease was off to the races right off the bat. After high school, I moved to Florida with my sister. My sister had moved down there a couple years prior to Orlando, and I was in my late teens moving down to a big city from a pretty, more of a country, North Carolina kind of setting, with nightclubs and bars all over. And I had a fake ID at 19 that worked everywhere I went, so there was nothing special about my 21st birthday. I was well underway by that time. And, somewhere in that time when I was in Florida, I was drinking heavily. I made a trip back to North Carolina to visit my parents, and I met a cousin of a friend from high school, and she became pregnant, and we got married. My son was born when I was 20 years old when my son was born. That really scared the shit out of me. I had already been drinking heavily for a while, and I want to say that was the first time that I had a desire to not drink like I was drinking for the first time, because I knew that I needed to do better for him, that I needed to just be present where I hadn't been present. I was just completely self-absorbed, self-seeking, selfish behavior. And that's the first time I remember wanting to not drink as much as I did. And it didn't last very long. I just kind of came up, I drank less, and then I smoked more, and it just didn't last very long. We got married the week before he was born, or maybe a month before he was born. We moved back to Florida, and I just continued doing the same stuff I had been doing. I got a good job, and I was making good money, but there wasn't enough time for me to do what I wanted to do between working and then having to, go home and be a dad, which I never was really a good dad. I'm still working on that now with my adult children, but that was a challenging phase, because a few years later, when my daughter was born, I had kind of given up on whether I was going to be able to not do this, and then I really tried again, and that was the first time. So now I'm 23 years old, and I realized that maybe I can't stop, because now I've tried a couple of times and I can't stop. I make myself these promises. I do all the things of, I'm not going to do it this week. I'm going to do this instead, and and it just never happened. I would always find a way. That the friend would always call. The event would always come up for the following week. I wasn't daily drinking, but I was certainly drinking to excess when I did drink, which was at least 3 days a week. Being just 23 years old. So around that time is when the company I worked for, a big, Fortune 500 company, I worked in a warehouse, made really good money. They hit me with a random drug test, and I failed that, and I lost. Well, I didn't lose that job directly. That was my first time they sent me to rehab. I tried telling them that that I was at a party and people were smoking, that it wasn't me, and the lady I remember from the employee assistance program, she said, "Well, Mr. Dosier, there would have had to been 20 people smoking, and you all would have had to have been in a phone booth for the amount." And I was like, "Oh, these people, like," it was. I was kind of beside myself that the lies that I would tell when I wasn't used to having somebody so blatantly call me out on it. And that happened when the first time I went to a rehab. It was an outpatient program, and that was my first exposure to that people actually have to make effort and live a specific way to not do this. Like what I've been trying to do, you can't necessarily, it wasn't only me that couldn't do this, the guy that led the group was in, 20 something years sober, and I'm pretty sure, thinking back on it, I think he had an original 1 year coin, and he just drilled a hole in it for every year that he would add to it. Because I don't think back then they had like you could get every year, You know, it was just they would collect like a stack of single-year chips. But I got through that, and I really wanted to not live that way anymore. I made it about 9 months sober. I went to some meetings outside of the group, and I remember going to the drink because I had no restraints. And I remember thinking on so many nights that I didn't have the courage to take my own life, but I was convinced that I could drink myself to death, that I could drink enough to, you know, just to end this game, to end this vicious cycle of just absolutely hating myself when I was sober, and then just waiting for the moments to get back to, you know, having a few drinks to take that edge off and to stop the guilt, you know, the self-imposed guilt of, you know, how I was living my life. It was it was a bad time. It was a really bad time. So I made it about a year. I guess it was about a year and a half after they had left, and then I was just off the rails. I couldn't pay my car insurance. I couldn't really do anything to maintain just myself. All I could do is get to my next drink, and all my resources and, you know, my money and my time was all only geared towards that. And I'm, you know, 25 years old now. So I moved back to North Carolina. My folks let me come back, you know, to their house, and it was just you know, it was just bad. I didn't want to live. But I was too, I don't know if I was too afraid or I just wasn't courageous enough to take that step of actually killing myself. I did get in I was getting pulled over when I was drunk one night, and I ran from the police, and they chased me. And the last thing I remember seeing was I ran in the ditch and knocked the tires off, and it was just the rims throwing sparks, and it was a brief police chase before I crashed the car in the ditch, and I woke up handcuffed to the gurney, you know, back here in North Carolina, and you know, there was something in me that wanted to not wake up, because that meant that I was going to have to face this thing that they told me about a few years earlier, that you know, that I was going to have to take these steps, and I was going to have to live this life, you know. And that was very intimidating. It was very scary. I didn't want to do that. So I had a DWI charge, lost my car. Life was just generally bad. My parents had to drive me around. I didn't have a driver's license. You know, I worked the whole time. I never stopped working. I would just drink my money away, or I would just spend it frivolously. I could never manage money well. Still working on that today. I'm very blessed with a wife today that's given me full support on that. Still growing in different aspects of my life. But after that, you know, in the fall of 2001, you know, life was bad. September 11th happened. I had a gut feeling just for years prior that this whole system, this whole game that we all play in our civilization and society was going to collapse at any moment. Like, you know, we all know how it all, you know, how this thing works, and it's a delicate, fragile system, you know. COVID really showed us that, how quickly things can shut down, and, you know, but when 9/11 happened, and like George Bush got, you know, he went on TV that night and he's like, y'all need to go to work tomorrow. And it was like, oh man, but I thought this was it. I thought, like, you know, it was going to be World War III and I wasn't going to have to. It's like, oh shit. So I continued drinking into the fall. And then it was like, I had some thoughts that maybe I need to make a real effort again. At least beat the 9 months that I did before. But I definitely didn't want to go back to an AA meeting. I wrote a letter to my uncle up in New York, asking him, because he had struggled with this for many years. He never got probably more than 2 or 3 years sobriety, and he relapsed and he relapsed. And I wrote him a letter and asked him, like, what do I need to do? Like, I don't want to do this. He's my mother's youngest brother. He's like 15 years older than me, so like a real uncle, older brother kind of guy. And he was stuck in the same thing I was stuck in. The insanity was he's the one I asked for help. So he sent me in the mail the pamphlets that are in the back of the room, all the little, tracks that we have at the meetings. He sent me a manila envelope full of those, and he wrote a letter that said, I don't know why it's not working for me, but go find these people that they have what you're looking for. And if you want it, you can get it there. I don't know why it's not working for me, but try this. And it was like, oh, I know, I kind of know, but now I'm like, I'm ready to do something. And New Year's came and went, everybody's in New Year's resolutions, and then I'm like, I'm trying to control it. So I'm like, well, what day am I going to pick as my last day? Because I'm going to have that for forever as my sobriety day. So I want to pick a good number. And then maybe there's some numerology to it. Maybe I can control it that way, that I can read into this thing. And it's like, it just wasn't working. I just kept drinking and putting it off and playing these games in my head. And then one night I'm sitting at the bar, and this woman says, I had 3 shots of Rumple Mints in front of me. Like, that's how I ordered, because that's how I drank. And she said, what is that? And I looked at it, and there was 3 shots in there. I was at the bar by myself with 3 shots in front of me and a beer in my hand. And I said, that's hell. That's pure hell. And she's like, well, why'd you order it? I was like, I don't know. And I drank all 3 shots. And then I went home. And the next morning, when I woke up, something was different. It was different. And it was scary. I had no belief in any kind of higher power. I was a devout atheist, loved to argue about the existence of a higher power. I believe we were all just like, just like the tomato plant at the end of the season. You just go back in the soil and that's all there is. It's a kind of a mechanical universe. And that next morning, or late that night, actually, before I went to sleep, after I drank those shots and managed to get home somehow, I prayed to a God I didn't believe in, a God that I didn't believe existed, because I was that desperate for life to be different. And that next morning, it was different. Big picture, looking back, it made my first few years of sobriety, when I'm trying to work with other alcoholics, like the whole came to believe thing, like for me, it wasn't came to believe. For me, for those of you that know the Christian tradition, it was a Saul to Paul on the road to Damascus, Damascus experience, where it was like a lightning bolt. It was that few hour period where I came to know that, there was a power out there greater than myself. And that terrified the shit out of me. And one of the first things I did that day was, I got up that morning and I shaved my head. I had pretty long hair, and something just told me to shave my head, because I knew I had to see somebody different in the mirror. And it was like, you get this crazy thought, and I was just like, go with it, even though I didn't want to do it. And that's actually what has me talking to you guys here tonight, is that when I learned very early on, like before I even made it to my meeting, that if something makes me uncomfortable, it's probably what I need. And it's what I need to do. So, I was thinking, well, let me pull up the meeting schedule. Let me see where it is. Well, there was a clubhouse not even a mile away from where I lived, right? So I didn't have a car. It was perfect. And they had meetings at 8 a.m., noon, 4, and 8 p.m. And it was like, it's 10:30 a.m. I'm like, oh, I'm definitely going to go to the 4. And it's like, no, you're not going to the 4. Like, you need to go now. You need to go now. And then, within an hour from there, I was at my first meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous. They call it the Sand. Life got better. It didn't, it began getting better, but it got worse before it got better because now I didn't have that coping mechanism to not face my reality. I had to face my reality, and that sucked. That sucked because it was a bad reality I had created, and I had to face it without the things I had been using to cope with that reality. But I kept coming back. I did 30 and 30 and 60 and 60. I got a sponsor quick this time instead of like the last time I was there 9 months hanging around before I got a sponsor. I got a sponsor quick, and he was great. And I just kept coming back. I kept coming back, and life has been better. My relationship with AA over the last 20 something years, it's been, I'll be very active for a period of time, and then I won't attend a meeting at all for a year or 2.5 years, and then I'll be back and be very active. I was very blessed in my early sobriety in the first 1 to 7 years. I was very blessed to be in a very small group with very mature sobriety. Everybody had at least 8 to 10 years more sober time than I did in my home group. So that first bunch of years, I felt really blessed that I had that. So I wasn't knocking heads with, a bunch of people that were basically in my same, in my same space. I was like a little kid that, that only had adult friends. So I did learn how not to drink, mastered that, got that figured out. But I didn't open up enough fully to allow the fullness that the program has to offer into my life. Like looking back on it, I could have, but it all happens, the way it's supposed to. And I've been, I was around 10 years in, I was offered a job that actually worked in bars. Like 5 nights a week, I was going to have to spend in the bars. I talked to my sponsor and my spiritual mentor about it and prayed about it. And it was like, yeah, this is where you're going. And I went there and did that. And, it turned out it gave me a lot of opportunity to carry the message, a lot of them who wanted, a lot of those during that time in my life, they were where I was. They didn't want to drink anymore, but they wanted to talk to you about it while they had a drink in their hand or on their fourth one. And because I was where they were at, because that's what they do there, right? But I wouldn't talk to them about it there. If they wanted to, we would get together for coffee when they're sober and we could talk about it. But I just wouldn't do that. But it gave me a real blessing of an opportunity to carry the message. I spent a lot of time, about 2.5 years, carrying the message to correctional facilities. That was a real blessing. That going once a week into the prisons with my sponsor. Just doing the things that keep me sober. It has been a spiritual journey for me, a journey of growth and development. I think, as most of us know, we know that, Alcoholics Anonymous, if we know the history of it, it was founded in a Christian tradition, kind of came from a Christian background. I know Christ, I love Christ. But I also know the fullness of God's creation and all of us being one love and just united under that love that, from which we all came, from which we all will return to. And that's kind of what Corey was talking about, what we shared in that first 2-hour conversation we had. And my life, that's how it was. That's kind of what happened. Where I'm at now is I'm in this place, man, that it's like, this is something I couldn't have imagined. So I don't think anybody said anything about the first 30 days, but if you're even in your first few years in this program, if you keep coming back, a life that you cannot imagine, is ahead of you. I have just, beautiful people around me that love me, that I love dearly. All the things, material things that I could want are, just abundant. I'm just very, very blessed. And it all came from going to that first meeting, from taking that advice from my uncle. He said, go find these people. And they have what you're looking for. And what I was looking for was a new life. And like I said, initially it wasn't easy. But I had a good sponsor that helped me do the work that was necessary to learn how not to drink and how to live life on life's terms. It's been such an amazing journey. I've done so much in sobriety. I'll be 50 years old in a few months. I just became a full-time firefighter EMT like 6 months ago. I'm very physically active. It was fun working side by side with a bunch of 20-something-year-olds, because although they have the physical, like, they don't have the mental strength to get through a lot of that stuff. So the old guy was just tough from experience, from drinking too much over the years. But so many things. I run a boat tour business. I do sightseeing tours, and sea turtle and dolphin watching tours in the intercoastal waterway. Take the boat out in the ocean every now and then. It's just an amazing